All right. Thanks everyone for coming to the September 2022 UCAN call. It actually looks like we don't have a formal agenda this time around, but did want to give a 2 thumbs up to everyone who made UCAN 0.9 land, which is amazing. And UCAN IPLD landed as well. And we're going to, and we also got a bunch of stuff into multi-formats for signature types, or sorry, we have a proposal into multi-formats for signature types that I think a lot of people will be able to use. Like, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff coming out of this this project right now, which is really great. Some of the specs that got written recently, I want to pull into several pieces, actually. IPLD has a canonicalization section in it, and that should actually probably become its own spec. But big thanks to Philip, Irakli, Daniel, and anyone else who I'm forgetting to getting 0.9 over the line, because that was a whole thing. So awesome.
Wait, can you talk about the multi-format signatures? I think that one slipped by me.
Sure, yeah. So in UCAN IPLD spec, we decided to, so it's not broken up as a header body signature. It's like, here's the payload, and then here's a signature type. And we got rid of the algorithm because you can, in most cases on the happy path, you know what the signature type is going to be based on the DID, right? It's like, this is going to be ECDSA or whatever, right? But there are cases like if you want to sign with EIP 191 for Ethereum data, which is just with prepended bytes, something like this is Ethereum data, right? And then the actual payload, you need to know that that's how it's being signed. And so we just defined a bunch of signature types, prefixes, maybe about 10 or so, to cover RSA and EDDSA and ECDSA and EIP 191 and all of these others as well. Part of the thinking for that was both like, yeah, this would be useful for this one spec, but we can also see a lot of other people using this as well. In multi-formats, there were already 2 signature types that were not as part of like a section. They're just kind of like on their own, I think, as part of Holochain. Is that right? Anyway, and I know that the FEM is going to need to sign Ethereum data or Ethereum looking data, or know how to read it at least relatively soon, because they're doing this FEVM project. And if we want to do anything with sign in with Ethereum, right, and add support for that, we're also going to need EIP 191 as well, right? So it's like we need to be able to distinguish separate from the key, just the signature type, basically.
Sweet. Yeah, that makes sense.
Chris.
This actually sounds topical to the item I requested getting added to the agenda, which is WebAuthn integration. I don't know if you've had a chance to read some of the comments I added to the discussion there. But I could recap if it's helpful to do so now.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that. Looks like it was yesterday sometime. Yeah, please recap.
So I was doing some investigation towards adding WebAuthn support in the RSUCAN sort of auxiliary key support crate. And I realized it seems like it's possible, but the nature of how data is signed by WebAuthn is different, you know, from how we sign data. And it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds relevant what you just talked about, you know, having sort of like a more dynamic notion of signature scheme. Do you think that there's maybe some overlap between these 2 topics? It's like the UCAN payload wouldn't be able to be signable like in sort of its raw form. It gets signed with some auxiliary auth data in WebAuthn, which diverges it somewhat from JWS.
Yeah, so for WebAuthn FIDO certificates, really, right? The format is just like completely different. And so the proposal essentially is with passkeys, which is from Google, Microsoft, Apple, just like the big players, which is, I think actually now maybe live on iOS 16, I'm not sure. That there will be hundreds of millions of people that now have some form of PKI that they can use, and that makes it a much bigger player than UCAN today. We want to have as many people able to use this stuff as easily as possible, and if we can outsource the key management parts, like with UCAN, you can always drop down to Web Crypto API or managed keys, in your .ssh folder or whatever. But if we can then also support other formats with large PKI deployments, then we kind of win, because if somebody comes with their own key, we don't have to provide any story whatsoever for key recovery and backup and all these things. So the other one that's related to this is sign with Ethereum and Cacao. So it's exactly the same. I don't want to call it problem. It's the exact same feature, really, right? Is like, how do we have something that maybe even an opt-in feature, but that probably libraries would want to support, especially something like passkeys, where you could have as a proof a passkey or as a proof a SIWI. Based on how FIDO works, I don't think that we're going to pass it UCANs to sign. Probably, we have looked at a design where we sort of like bounce a request off of a web service, what do they call it now? Service worker, which fakes out having a server that could then construct the thing and send it back to you and all of this stuff, right? It's like, that's probably way too much. Let's just take an existing one off the shelf just to get started, and then say a UCAN can extend this certificate and look at it from that point of view. But yeah, it's going to just be like completely different, basically. The actual signature type on those will probably be one of the standard ones, though I haven't looked at that part yet.
Actually, maybe I missed something. Like, why do you need a server component at all to integrate with WebAuthn?
Right. So the spec, the FIDO spec, there absolutely is a self-signed version of WebAuthn. There's also when you read through the spec itself, it talks a lot about client server model. And so it's really in that world where it's like, I'm going to do a domain binding against this service and whoever's sitting on the other side of DNS, right? And so a lot of the libraries and a lot of the tooling have this as a baked in base assumption. And so when we looked at this back in, geez, when was this, Daniel? 2019 or so, a lot of the self-signed stuff just didn't work. And so we played around with some of these hacks that we just didn't like, which is why we haven't integrated it yet, right? But now that it's going to get this wider deployment, we probably need to look at it more seriously.
Okay. Well, I did some investigation and reading through the spec yesterday. It seems like there's some interesting avenues to pursue, but the problematic part, at least with regards to the current UCAN spec, is just that you can't verify the signature after you generate the token, because the signature is a signature over both the payload that you give the API and some internal detail, metadata that the API has. And so you need to ship that metadata along with the rest of your UCAN token somehow in order for somebody to be able to verify the token.
Is the metadata deterministic, or does that need to be supplied along with the token?
So I don't think it's easy to infer the metadata, because it includes like a count of the number of times the authenticator was used, which is anyway.
Isn't there like field could be maybe a place where we can stick that metadata into and just define a like what field and whatnot?
Yeah.
The metadata is given to you after the fact also. So like you can't know it in advance of the signature being performed. Again, because it includes.
Yeah, but
like,
I mean, and
yeah.
you could like generate the whatever signature, but then after you get a metadata, then create a UCAN, right? Or is that not?
Technically,
Like an envelope you can of some kind.
Yeah, the way I think about it, I think it's similar to like sign with the Ethereum, like you claim the capability on your own with one specific DID, but then you can say, here's the facts why I'm able to claim it, which is here's the signature from this, whatever the spec is called, I don't remember, and here's the metadata. And you just verify that piece.
So it's like a separate, like it's sort of like a leaf node specialty verification step in order to verify that you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I don't know if it's a good approach, but
another way to do it would be we could just add the metadata to the signature. So the signature, and then we have a custom kind of signature type that is essentially WebAuthn. And to verify a signature, you need both. Well, you have the normal kind of JWT structure, and then you take the payload and you use some part of the signature to add the metadata, and then you verify the normal signature, which is the rest of the signature essentially.
Right.
It's kind of a hack. It's but it reminds me a lot about these classic kind of ad hoc signature schemes that we often think about supporting in some ways, like Siwi or something like that.
Yeah, it seemed like there was it was really close to having the potential, like you can specify the type of credential that you want your authenticator to use when signing. And like it seemed like there was a potential to just have like no additional machinery needed in order to sign and verify these payloads, but for this weird quirk of the signature scheme.
Yeah, I mean, definitely further study needed. The idea that, so just to make sure I'm understanding, you're saying you could use this literally as a signer for a UCAN, not just as a proof on a UCAN.
Yeah, like literally you can pass arbitrary payloads into as the challenge for WebAuthn credential creation or attestation request, which could just be literally the UCAN payload, which I don't know. The tricky part, of course, is like, well, if the signature that you get back is just not something that will fit into the standard flow, maybe because it's such a big uplift to ask all of UCANs to support a specialty signature verification scheme, that, I mean, I think maybe Irakli's suggestion that you just have like a specialty, specially signed thing inside of the UCAN payload, it may as well be that, because it's equally troublesome either way.
Is there a size limit to the challenge field?
It doesn't say in the spec. It says the spec says for security purposes it should be at least 16 bytes long, but it doesn't say that there's an upper limit. There may be a practical upper limit in web browsers.
We can definitely do 16 bytes. You can do a lot more than 16 bytes for them.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Now that we're passing data around as a table, we could also just have it sign the hash of whatever it's signing.
Right, if it gets too big, yeah.
If it gets too big, yeah. I mean, that's what it's going to sign anyway. It will hash it, right? Like, right. Yeah. So, Philip.
Yeah. That was the question of like, do we add support for, or do we force everyone to support this kind of signature scheme? And I think we'll. It reminds me of the JWT thing, which is like JWT has a bunch of, recommended signature types, and then it's open at the end of the day. There's a bunch of things involved though, maybe, because if we have a custom signature type, how do we signal that this is possibly a weird kind of signature? But then again, I guess this is the same discussion as the
You could maybe
IPLD one, and yeah, put something in the header maybe, yeah.
So the VARSIG thing is actually kind of really good fit for that because it's a multi-format. So right now the format is one byte saying what the signature type is, another byte telling you the size of a signature. And we actually came up with a like catch-all sort of signature, then size, then signature, and then signature name, like UTF-8 string. So we could just as well expand that union into a signature type that after a signature puts a metadata in C.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really neat if something like that were sort of part of the spec, just because it means we could transparently have WebAuthn signed UCANs, maybe. I mean, I think it warrants some investigation to verify what the constraints are in web browsers.
This wasn't our last job. But no.
Yeah. One of the things that originally prevented us or stopped us, I guess, from going down this path, other than the fact that it had really low usage at the time, is that the FIDO certificates can get like enormous, like just huge. They're really not meant as a chain format like at all. But again, one of the advantages of us switching to this table formats is we can do that incrementally now, right? And we can say like, here's the rest of the chain, and as a separate request, because we ran out of space, here's the FIDO certificate or something, right? Yeah. But yeah, honestly, treating the entire certificate as a signature, I hadn't thought of at all. I think it's great. Super clever.
Another thing to consider here, and it's less technical and more UX, is, and I'm not sure if like WebAuthn prompts have changed since I looked into it a couple of years ago, but the prompts that it was giving were kind of scary for users. It's like, this website's asking to use your biometric data for authentication or something. It's like, whoa, what the hell's going on? And it's sort of the same issue that I ran into when with doing Ethereum signatures without Siwi, is that you're not giving any information to the user about what they're signing. So it's like, even if they're comfortable with using biometric data to provide a signature, it's like, okay, what resources am I actually like giving permission to use here? And there's no way to get that to pop up in the UI. And so doing it for like kind of like fine grain access is like, there's just not really any way to bring that information to up to the user.
I noticed that they do have some affordance for like user displayed metadata related to each one of the actions. But
oh, they
like,
do? Okay.
Well, it's very minimal. It's like,
oh yeah,
the name of your service. This may be displayed to the user.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. Part of me wants to just hand wave and be like, well, this is ultimately like a browser UX problem, or like these, but you're right. Like it does create, hesitancy among users.
And I also think it's actually less of a big deal if the WebAuthn key is like a highly permissioned key that's doing highly permissioned delegations, because then it's like, okay, well, they lied and you got a lot of permissions or whatever, but you were planning on giving a lot of permissions anyway. It's whenever you're getting it down to like a pretty tightly scoped permission that like an app can kind of throw whatever they want in there and maybe get some permissions that you don't want to give.
There's also some cases where it will be like a one-time sign-in thing where you create a long-lived token that is then used as proof in another context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it works. I think it could work pretty well from like a off lobby perspective, like full control of your account type perspective, or from like a vigorously sandboxed page.
Would it work like if maybe we build up a thing where you ask for stability and then kind of stick those in the proofs? That way you have multiple dialogues. In the dialogue, you can describe a couple, like trying to prove them.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think all this comes down to the how much control do we get to hand over to the user, and specifically, what's the user expectation? And that is about to become a moving target, right? Because every iOS device, every Microsoft device is going to support this by the end of the year, right? They will be coming up and iterating on UX patterns. Lots of people are going to be trying different things, and we're going to see how people are more used to this stuff. So even QR codes pre-pandemic, right? Very few people, I mean, Asia, they were more widespread, but in at least in North America, very few people knew what these things were, even though they had built-in support in your phone. Pandemic hits, and now QR codes are everywhere. And that's a change in user behavior. So I think we'll see something similar. I hope.
But is the change in user behavior that they're just gonna like approve signatures without caring what they're signing? Like that's like
Probably.
yeah. Okay.
Definitely, definitely.
It also sounds like maybe is this an opportunity to engage with any training over them. It can be very daunting and painful process, but it might be worth it.
So at least on my side, you cut out for a second. Is who should we talk to?
Engage in a specification working group.
The WebAuthn one.
Yeah.
Right.
Or is it WebAuthn? I said it was a separate one, but whatever the spec work is, that's usually a good place to surface use cases while they're being worked on, which maybe spec is overlooking.
Yeah, I seem to like remember hearing some rumor that, well, like the problem with WebAuthn is that it's WebAuthn and not WebAuthz, and we're trying to use it for authorization. But I seem to remember hearing that they were planning on adding in something around authorization and being able to like discuss resources in WebAuthn requests. But I think I heard that rumor in one of these meetings, but I can't remember where it was. So if anybody remembers that.
Alan?
Yeah, this is going on in the verifiable credentials community as well. They want to turn claims into authorizations. And it's a mistake because they're disjoint. There are certain fields you need in an authorization that make no sense in a claim and so on. So, and the revocation mechanisms are different. So if you have any influence, you might want to let them know not to do that. Or if they do, have a field that says this is an authorization and this other thing is an authentication, and never the two shall meet.
Yeah, really, really good point. Yeah, I guess there is some overlap specifically around the signature, right? To say this is so and so because you can prove the private key, but that and that's where it ends. Right.
So the motivation in the VC community is use all the infrastructure for encryption and signing and all that. But you get into this horrible problem of somebody's going to make a claim that names a resource, and then it makes no sense, and it's just a mess. So you have to have things that say, if this is an authorization, it must specify a resource. If this is a claim, it must not specify a resource, and so on. The details to be worked out, but there are enough points of confusion that it's dangerous without that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually one of the most common questions that we get that we need to do more writing about in UCAN is like, what's the difference between a UCAN and a verifiable credential? It's like, well, one of them gives you access to do something and another thing describes you, right? But it's like, there are these slightly different cases, right? So.
There's also like a handful of ways of using VCs for use cases other than the VC describing you. Like, it's not necessarily true that all VCs are just like authentication.
Yeah, one of the big differences is on an authorization, you know who will verify it. And on a claim, you don't. Right? And that's a big difference. And the revocation mechanisms are different. And delegation means different things. And so you've got to be clear which this certificate is so you don't mix and match.
Yeah, like Ori has a spec for that I found last week. I think I linked to it in the discussion I started on UCAN discussions. That's like using VCs for authorizations, and you can distinguish the authentications and authorizations by just seeing whether the VC has type authorization or not.
Right, that was the thing I proposed, that if you were going to do this, you must specify the type. And then the rules for what goes in the certificate depend on the type. And if you don't do that, you're going to have a mess.
Cool.
What are the, this is a tangent, but I would love to dig in. What are the use cases for having the same certificate format other than you get to share tooling? Would you ever want to go from one to the other?
No, it's the argument is purely the tooling. Why rewrite a million lines of code that you've already got in place?
Mhm.
That's the argument Ori made when he started this discussion.
I mean, in a sense, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're like, there's an extant API that's going to be on millions of devices that we're trying to repurpose for our use case.
Yeah, and one of my hobbies is overloading. And every time I do it, I regret it. And yet I continue to do it. And this is another example.
Well, something must be good about it if you keep doing it.
No, nothing's good about it. It just sounds like a good idea at the time.
It's just so tempting.
Yes, right.
Another way of saying like just to reuse tooling kind of over like hide some other benefits, which it might just be like reusing tooling is another way of just saying like interoperability, a bigger ecosystem to have more network effects within. And so I feel like just reusing tooling like understates the point.
I don't know if this is any useful to this discussion, but some of our stuff kind of end up looking at the border, I think, between two, and I don't know if it's a good or bad. I'm like, this information kind of makes me question some of it. Like we often use, not often, like we literally don't have any other resources on DID key. Everything is kind of mapped outside of the system to the other names, which kind of is both verifiable claim and authorization from whoever owns that key to do things on it. I think for a moment we did consider like claims as a specific schema, which would be like claim colon and whatever, as a way to kind of bring two together and maybe reuse some of the tooling, but also signal the difference. Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't have anything specific, but so it might.
Yeah, so a lot of the fields are going to be the same, but there are some that are just quite different between the two. And the problem is not that you can't get it right, it's that people won't get it right. And so you want to make it as hard as possible for people to screw up.
Sounds like maybe we should create an issue for at least clarifying it that in the UCAN spec and try to propose the way to go about it.
Clarify what?
Like how people who want to use verifiable claims, how to bind them with UCANs, I guess.
I don't think there's no discussion I heard on the VC calls about UCAN. They just want to use the formats they have now for authorizations rather than use something else. The only alternative they've talked about, I think, is ZCAP LD.
I mean, which makes sense. It's probably a closer format for them, going back to it, formats. Irakli and Bengo, I'd love to, because this discussion's come up like over the course of like several months of like getting onto this like order, and I like every time we talk about it, I keep having like getting closer to what a better understanding of like what it is you're trying to do. And I think maybe if we just like explode it out into a longer like written discussion about like the actual concept being played with, it would be like helpful to get like more people thinking about the problem. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, part of this is you're trying to do like did like things, but without a separate did document. Just trying to like connect keys together, say like, you know, these can all do these things, which is something UCAN does. and then also showing that they have control over something like email, so that you could then do like rotation or something like that. Is that the use case you're thinking about?
For the verifiable claims, or I'm not sure what, like the dots you are connecting.
Yeah,
Most,
there's no use case here for VCs in DAGhouse.
so I don't know, sort of maybe, but like I think we're working around the need. Like we definitely do have this thing where you provide us email to make your account known to us so we can reach you out. And we've been thinking of many different ways how to like do that. I think the ones that we're settling on, and I'm happy to share some documents describing it, is to go to email verification service who are service delegated capability to redeem certain vouchers and claim a voucher with the email address. And in the email, you basically will get the delegation chain, which will allow you to claim the voucher and like, I don't know, get a free tier services from us. But every actor in the system is identified by DID key as included. And that allows us not to have to go to a database or do any kind of out of bound lookups, because we can verify the chain and it's good and we're okay with that. So in some sense, it is verifiable, but not necessarily claimed. I don't know if it answers your question at all, Brooklyn. Sorry, it's kind of.
We just built top of UCAN.
Well, yeah, I think Brooklyn's ask was like, we can write, or more things can be written down as they come up. I did start a discussion on the UCAN discussion around VCs, and like it involved, the use case it involved is kind of, I think, the most important one so far, which is not like Web3 storage is using VCs or anything. It's more like, how do we explain to developers that want to build, like front-end developers, let's say, that want to compose services like Vision or Web3 storage that use UCANs with other services or APIs that use VCs, and like, how do we just make it make sense to junior developers? That's more where I'm coming from than any particular advanced use case, product use case.
Right. And
Sorry, the point that I was trying to make earlier, which was like, right now, basically, how if you want to capture a verifiable claim or link to it somehow from UCAN is pretty much whatever you come up with. So what I was calling for earlier, like maybe we should try to have at least a proposal. Here's how you can do it, and this is how people implementing a spec might recognize it. So kind of like this, I don't know, verifiable claim field, or whatever the field name was that you delegation versus claim.
Authorization versus authentication, maybe. Yeah, and that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
that seems like a good document. That seems like it doesn't even need to be the UCAN spec, to be honest. And it could be like an add-on spec or something. And also, like, I don't ever need, I don't think we have like a real concrete reason to make that spec, but when we do, that would be like probably the best time to make it.
Right. And just to clarify, because of the delegation capacity, I guess I'll say capability, capacity in UCAN, are you hoping to be able to delegate the claim as well?
Like if you had and I think there is some spec about a verifiable claims for email, right? So if there's a system that can verify emails and we can get a verifiable claim from Google that somebody owns that email address, it would be nice if we can derive from that capability saying, I can access that email and here's my proof. That would be really helpful way for us not to have to write a service that sends you an email to verify that you exist, right? And those kind of things would be really useful. So it's kind of bridging from verifiable claim to claim of certain capabilities.
But look, there's always a reason you give someone a capability, right? That could be a verifiable claim. It could be a web authent. It could be, they control a specific email address. And there are just a gazillion different ways you want to do that. I don't think that belongs in the UCAN spec, but if you're building a particular system for a particular use case, then you want to specify how you're going to make that decision and what are the inputs.
Yeah, and so like why I'm digging in with the DAG House folks is it's like if we're trying to reuse as much of the structure as possible, do we want to have like a variant on UCAN that is separate, that doesn't have an attenuations field, or is this additional fields into the same thing? Does it only work as a proof, right? So I'm like trying to figure out like how exactly the two would.
So at least the way I was thinking when I was kind of saying that, I think it at the capability level, like when I delegate capabilities from actor 1 to actor or principal A to principal B, I imagine that capability would be I claim to have email access, which is my CAN field, with mail to email address, and it like that capability can have a NB field and saying proof, and here's a proof which is verifiable claim in some format, right? So
I don't understand.
when I do the
I don't
validation,
understand why you need that in the capability. I mean, the fact that you got the capability is up to whoever got it, and whoever's honoring it doesn't need to know how that decision was made.
well,
I think it's
when
fine.
I do the verification of some claims, or like UCAN verification, I would like to be able to check all of that, including that you actually do have access to the email address that you're.
Yeah, no. That's getting to something like Ligong's hybrid capability system, which was a total mess. If I'm a service and I get a capability with a request, all I should do is make sure that that's a valid delegation and that it's for the request that's being made. And anything else is extraneous and just adds complexity with no value. And in fact, it makes the system harder to use. I may want to go back up the delegation chain and say, why did you do this? But most of the time, that's not what you do.
Okay, maybe I'll write it down in one of the whatever discussion threads, and I'd love to get a feedback there because I'm not sure I can follow up on every single point.
Okay, that's
But
fair,
I would love to, yeah. Maybe there's
yeah.
a better ways to do it, and I'd love to.
This is a common mistake people who are new to capabilities make, which is they want to add authentication information in there as well. You can do it. Sometimes it's useful, but only in reducing the set of permissions that are allowed in the capability. If you ever use that authentication to increase it, you're going to have vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so I think maybe the piece of missing context here is all the capabilities in our case are self-issued by the user to the service.
Yeah.
There's no service that delegates capabilities.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's the right way to do it.
Okay, so when user wants to register account, which is basically a DID key, we want them to prove that they are a human.
Yeah.
And the way right now we're trying to work around the verifiable claims that you actually have access to the email address with a ways where we involve the validator sending you email.
Yeah.
I would love that not to be the case, to have something in a verifiable claims that everyone that can understand and use that to.
Yeah, exactly. And now you give out the capability to do something at some service, but that capability doesn't have to say how you got that claim, how you got that permission. It just says, this is a valid delegation, honored, or,
Yeah, so you do need to provide the verifiable, the proof of verifiable claim though, right?
No, you just have to follow the delegation chain. So I stand up a service and I create a root capability, and I delegate to somebody a subset of the permissions, and that somebody delegates to somebody else. And now a request comes back, and all I have to do is verify that the delegation chain is correct and that the request is authorized.
So if user comes and says, here's my account ID, here's my email,
right?
And they self-issue the capability, I need some way of trusting the users that they actually have access to that email address without necessarily me being in a position of sending them email and verifying.
That's right. That's right. So there is that step that grants the first capability. And however you do it, authentication, roles, attributes, claims, whatever, there's that step. But once you have the capability, it's only the delegation chain, and the verifier doesn't have to know why those delegations were made.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
Okay.
So I think maybe where we got disconnected. So
Yeah,
that
okay.
first claims that says
That's right.
I user have access to that email address. I want a field that is maybe a known field that would be, here's a proof that you actually have it, so that validators that can verify. Right, because
Yeah,
you're making the claims that I have access to that email address.
Well, I think just using a claim, and it's not necessarily an email address, it might be something else. So the input is a claim, whatever it is. Email address is one common claim that you would like, but there might be others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like even through this discussion, like, oh, okay, like I think I understand. You want a DID that you know is a human, and like all this stuff, like it's becoming like slightly clearer. Let's definitely take this over into the discussions. I'm just also watching the time here. We have 15 minutes left, and Chris has had his hand up for like a really long time. So, Chris.
Sorry, just one thing quickly before it falls out of our minds. Irakli, you mentioned there was something you were doing with regards to making like self-describing signatures. I was wondering if you could maybe just like link to whatever that is, or maybe drop a name in the chat.
Yeah, I'll post the link. It's in a IPLD UCAN spec, but I'll drop it.
Yeah, it ended up having to be called VARSIG, variable signatures, I think, because multisig is kind of taken. So.
Would you call it a multi-proof?
But it's not a proof, it's a signature.
Got it. But you're also putting other stuff in the signature and contriving new signature types.
No, it's just description. Well, signature is it, I think. Yeah, I pasted a link in the like message thing.
And then we took exactly that and just copied it over into a PR on multi-formats.
I was also told by Michael that apparently like something like this had been discussed to no end within PLO. So I think we might see more adoption in a bunch of other places too.
Awesome. Yes, I see lots of people reading.
Yeah, there's a good chance I'll probably experiment with using something along those lines to enable WebAuthn integration, although point well taken about mixing Authn and Auth, and I'll try to keep that in mind as I'm going through.
There's also related things within that specs that we did for DIDs that might be interesting for folks as well, which kind of is a similar thing where we use first byte in multi-formats to signal it's a key of certain type DID. And the last one is any DID. So it's a byte that says it's any DID, and the rest is a UTF-8 encoding of whatever comes after DID colon. That way you can stick any DIDs in there. But we could also have more specialized ones where like we can have a clever format. We just need to extend this union type, both in VARSIGs and the DIDs. And the reason I'm mentioning, I think I would love to like get Sergey's input on that. I don't know if you, Sergey, had a chance to look at any of that, but hope was that we can get it closer to the Cacao stuff. And enable some of that stuff too. Can be async too.
Yeah, it is better be as async. Like I have lots of stuff on my plate, and I'm trying to slowly go through it. Well, it happens on the kind of low pace, but well. I think we have, like you and I have other additional topic to discuss. I'll get back to you quite soon.
Okay.
Awesome. And yeah, Chris, just to clarify all these multi-signatures and stuff, this is the IPLD representation, which then you could take and encode to CBOR or protobufs or whatever, right? Or JWT. The JWT version then has the algorithm in the header, right? And so you can today put whatever you want in that header as long as the recipient can validate it.
Right. So, I mean, I guess what's forming in my mind is just that we would maybe for experimental purposes have an algorithm that indicates this is the WebAuthn encoding, specialized encoding of whatever the credential type is.
Yeah. Algorithm : highly experimental WebAuthn. I like it.
I don't know if this is kind of like a sanity check, but like, aren't there a lot of things that WebAuthn could refer to? Like, my understanding is there's like level 1s and level 2s, and then there's passkey stuff, and there's public key credentials, and then there's other proposed standards that extend the WebAuthn APIs. So I guess I just find myself thinking like, is there actually going to be like one enum that means WebAuthn, or is there going to be like quite a few? And actually we need to start being more precise about how we refer to which part of WebAuthn or something.
Those names are just metadata in IPLD, so like we can rename them. There will be no change in terms of like implementation as long as the code stays the same. So I think we can extend it as we go. Case by case.
My biggest worry is just making sure we don't talk past each other or we're not misunderstanding each other from the very beginning.
Totally.
And that's not an active concern of mine. I'm just sort of like I said, I'm just checking my own understanding because like as I worked with WebAuthn at my last job, and I think there's like a lot of specs that have WebAuthn in the title. There's a whole work.
Yeah, it's definitely not the most well organized domain of names, especially when you consider that it's like it's related to FIDO and CTAP, and then passkey is like a whole branded version of all of it.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Dimitri, who was in here, but I think dropped off, also has like proposed years ago WebAuthn extension that is sometimes referred to as Chappy, in which not only could you use WebAuthn to create and use public key credentials, which is at least what I used it for a couple years ago, but also verifiable credentials as like a first-class citizen. So you'd be able to be like navigator.credentials.get a credential with some kind of properties. And like, I think that's a pretty cool spec, but I think that's technically WebAuthn, but I'm pretty sure that's not what people are talking about here.
Yeah, so anyone please correct me if I'm wrong. My current understanding, which could be totally broken because I haven't really looked at it deeply enough in the past like 2 years, 3 years, is what we're really talking about is a FIDO certificate, and the WebAuthn layer is an interface in a browser, right? And so there's this like separation between the user experience portion and like what we would actually validate on receipts of such a UCAN. Are there other things other than FIDO that WebAuthn supports? It's all FIDO, right?
I mean, I think like insofar as that, at least in the Chappy case, which whatever, we won't talk about that. It's technically non-FIDO. Not that I know of, I guess, other than that.
I might need some help with the terminology, but my understanding is that there are underlying types of credentials that can be supported by the authenticators that whatever WebAuthn is wrapping. And these include various like common key materials that we might be otherwise supporting using web crypto. And you can refer to these credentials by some well-known ID, and you can get data signed against them, and you can get the public key information for the credentials. And between those, pieces of primitive information, we can essentially put together the same stuff we would have, for web crypto API. Is that coherent with the notion of FIDO certificate? Because when we say FIDO certificate, I don't know if that's like a catch-all for like it can point to any of these credential types, or it's like a separate thing.
Yeah, Fido is like its own certificate format, and then it has like subtypes inside of it. It sounds like from what you were saying that maybe there's more than Fido. I'm not sure. I have to go dig through WebAuthn specifically, I guess. My understanding is that the default is
Sorry, I dropped out there for a second.
okay. I'll just repeat the last like 5 seconds or so, I guess. So yeah, I guess it's possible that WebAuthn could support more than that. My existing understanding was that Fido was like the underlying thing for all of these, even though Fido has like subtypes. But from what you just said, it sounds like maybe there's more. So clearly, at least I need to go read the WebAuthn spec again. But yeah, we should definitely
use WebAuthn APIs to issue do password credentials. It's just like not that interesting, but technically it's WebAuthn. But I think all of the cryptographically interesting use cases for WebAuthn are almost, or as far as I've seen, always Fido. So it sounds like I think your understanding is probably at least as good as mine.
I think takeaway maybe here is like, let's just not call it WebAuthn and call it something
like Fido or something. Another thing that from my last experience with WebAuthn is like, I seem to recall that my last employer stuff was all at 25519, but like, because in practice, you could only really use WebAuthn public key credentials, at least with Sept P256 something or other. Like we basically had to, it was like a blockchain project, but it was like, okay, well, this technically you also can use that curve, but only because in practice, that's the only way we could use WebAuthn in the browsers at the time. And I guess I just wanted to share that experience and see if that was something else we were juggling here is like certain only, I don't think Ed 25519 is like supported by WebAuthn APIs. And I don't think that's changing with, or I don't know of that changing with passkey, whatever.
Yeah. I don't know about WebAuthn, but for web crypto, Igalia is helping us to have an implementation and do the spec work. I assume that once it's in web crypto, it will make it to WebAuthn as well. But yeah, I don't know. Probably 10 years we will have it. Something.
Isn't it a detail of the authenticator though? Like what keys are supported?
I don't think so. Like I think that practically, I don't think that like it made it to web standard. If those authenticators are using a 25519, I don't think they're meeting what passed TR through W3C. Like I really don't know. I just am more speaking from the experience where like a big dev team was not able to figure out how to use WebAuthn for ED25519. At least where our authenticators we wanted to support was like YubiKey and then Apple's biometric stuff that came out like a year or two ago.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be implemented in browsers, although it certainly has made its way into the spec. So
yeah, so yeah. Basically like if anyone wants to roll that out and use it like in the next year on major browsers, they probably also may need to be ready to use that curve and not something like Ed 25519 all the way through.
Yeah. I think it really depends on what, well, I think somebody just said this. It depends on what the authenticator has, right? It's like if I have a YubiKey, it'll pass that through, sign it, and go back up. The stuff that's just baked directly into the browser, I would be surprised if it had Edwards keys, but apparently Chrome actually has them, just not in the web crypto API. It has them in like another API, or is in TLS or something. So there's some support, like they actually have the code already. The last time I heard from we had somebody join a Fission like demo day call from Google on the Chrome team. And we asked specifically about Edwards, and she went to the team and came back and was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's never going to get in." But now there's this work happening with Igalia, so maybe, I hope it would certainly make my life easier. There are some elliptic curves already in the web crypto API, but people are pretty sussed about them, right? So.
Do you have a sense of why they think it would never happen just because of the inertia, or?
Yeah, it's just like to get something to land something in Chrome, there has to be like really dedicated long-term support, and to change the web crypto API, it's like even more because it's security related. And then you've got to go through the whole standardization process first, because why would they ship it? And but Safari doesn't support it or something, right? Like
And it's a node
it's
now
not that it would,
also, so you need to get node around it too.
right. Yeah, exactly. So it's just like the rolling weights of just getting everybody on board with this thing is just very, very high.
Years ago, there was discussion in a spec working group, like web crypto working group, and all the browsers said, yes, it sounds great, except somebody needs to take a lead and work on a spec and then implementation, and it's not us. And that's kind of how we thought maybe Galia can play a role there with post spec. So it seemed like the agreement that it is a good idea was there. It just nobody felt like it was high priority on their list to tackle that problem. So maybe if we provide that, we can get it in. So I'm more optimistic is what I'm saying.
Awesome. We have 2 minutes left in the time slot. Are there any final burning things people want to chat about? All right, awesome. Sorry.
One minor point. I was looking through the spec about the root of the delegation chain. And you start with the principal, who's the owner, but it's simpler if you start with the resource itself. The resource server issues the first key to the owner, and then you don't have a key management problem at all. Where should I put that in discussion, in issues?
Issues or discussion, either works.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, sounds like that's relatively standard from the broader community, but it sounds like a pattern that a bunch of us are discovering. I know that the DAG House folks are doing that, for example. Yeah, on the FIDO stuff, because it sounds like there's like quite a lot to dig in with this. Probably the first step is let's continue that discussion thread. If it needs to break out into a bunch of separate sub-threads and it's just like confusing to follow the discussion, we can just create a repo, like its own repo, and then we can have like separate discussions, and people can have submit early versions of a spec or proposals or any of that stuff into there as well. But let's just keep it in that one discussion for now, just to keep it simple, I guess, unless somebody really wants to really dig in. Yeah. Other than that, I'm at least going to turn the recording off now. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you all next month.